Good afternoon. We are here once again to share a presentation with Dr. Marcello Ruta. We wish to thank him in public. We have been working with him over the past few months in order to put together this meeting, which has some particularities. The first one is that we have already had Marcello with us at the Center of Hermeneutics Studies, and his presentation was so interesting, it was so exciting that we've decided to invite him again. And he very generously shared with us as part of the research that he's conducting. He shared one article. And we thought that for today's meeting, we might be able to add this, which has to do with translating the article that Marcello shared with us, which has to do with what he's going to be presenting today. This is an article by doctors Martin Fleiderer and Hartmut Rosa. So we decided to delve into a joint effort, and that is how we arrived at what is bringing us together today. We've acquired this very interesting material, which was granted to us by Marcello, and then we were granted authorization by both authors and by the publishing house in order to publish this material and make it available to our audience in our page. So when all of this happens, when this happened, Gaston Rossi and myself decided to translate it, and we wish to thank Marcello with regards to how you explored the various concepts that you open up to us as part of the joint work that we are carrying out. So we would especially like to thank you because it implies a degree of commitment and engagement that it goes beyond the fact of just spending a few minutes with us. It's a lot more than that, and it's so good. It's so nice to contact you and to have conversations with you as well. My pleasure. Yes, and it will continue to be our pleasure, hopefully. The people that are in the room will see in your computers that there's an icon that is shaped like a globe, and you will see that that's the interpretation icon. So you can not select that icon and leave it in the original languages, or else you can select either Spanish or English. Professor Ruta will be speaking in English and he will be showing his slides in English as well. So, well, you go ahead and choose the language that you prefer. So after Dr. Ruta's presentation, we are going to open it up to questions and to the debate and the dialogue for those that are present in today's meeting. I will provide a brief intro on what topic we are going to be devoting ourselves today, what we will be hearing from Marcello's presentation, and then I will introduce Marcello in a very succinct way, because if we had to share your entire bio, we would be spending more than 2 hours introducing you, because your work is so profuse, it's so prolific and so interesting that we would dwell on each article and it would take a very long time. So we are going to provide just a very brief bio from you. So, well, we are meeting today to be able to listen to this presentation, which bears the following title: The Significancias of Resonance in the Musical Domain, a First Tentative Analysis. The article by Fleiderer and Rosa, which has to do with music as a sphere of resonance, which was published in 2020, fulfills the role of mapping the use of the function of resonance in the musical domain by organizing the field of analysis across three pillars or three axes, the horizontal, diagonal, and vertical axis, as they are supplied in Rosa's main article. This is what the authors called axis, exactly. Actually, the authors called these axes in their article. In this presentation, says Marcello, my intention is to continue with this operation by illustrating three broader panoramas of musical resonance across all three dimensions, the dimensions that I just mentioned, vertical, horizontal, and diagonal. This will allow me to underscore if special significances, mnemotechnic, transcendental, dialogic transcendences in the musical domain, so that the musical domain becomes a special domain for this analysis. Marcello's presentation, as I said just now, I will just provide a very brief bio of his work. Marcello was born in Milan. He was trained in music and he got his degree as a pianist and his master's degree in Italy. His philosophical journey took him to study his master's degree in Italy. Then he moved on to France to study another master's degree and his PhD. And then in Switzerland, he worked in Switzerland. So this was the next degree that he obtained as part of the European academic system. His main philosophical interests range from theoretical philosophy to aesthetics, the philosophy of music, and post-colonial theory. In collaboration with Alessandro Bertinetto, Marcello has recently co-authored and published the Routledge Manual of Philosophy and Improvisation in Arts. From the moment that he got his professional degree in 2017, he has collaborated at the University of Bern, at the University of Fribourg, and he has also worked as OBA assistant and privatus docens. The OBA assistant is the higher assistants, and privatus docens are teachers in charge of seminars. Since June 2022, Marcello has collaborated as a scientific assistant at the University of Arts in Zurich. And it is worth noting that Marcello speaks 5 languages. Marcello, I will give the floor to you right now so that you can get started. And thank you once again for sharing this very nice moment with us. Thank you so much, Laura. You have been so generous with your introduction. So I will just share a few words in Spanish to begin with, and then I will move forward with the presentation. Well, my words have to do with gratitude. I wish to thank the University of San Martin and all of the institutions and individuals that have collaborated with the translation of the article. More particularly, I would like to thank Laura for her time and the attention that she has devoted to me over the past few weeks.
Now we start in English. In any case, I have always the Italian accent, so whatever language I will speak, you will always recognize the Italian accent. But it's something that I cannot and I don't want to conceal somehow. So let's see how I can. We can start. So I will start with an introduction, the conceptual articulation of the notion of resonance and its fitness in the application to the musical domain. This was already more or less presented. So I will, one moment that I will move here this. Okay. So I will start with this passage from Rosa's main book, main study. So there can no doubt that the concept, this is the translation, of course, and which is not unproblematic, we will see. There can be no doubt that the concept of resonance is a highly suitable musical metaphor for describing the qualities of relationships, and that it moreover offers enormous potential for analyzing how human beings relate to the world in nearly every area of life. Merely employing it metaphorically, however, is not sufficient if we wish to conceptually and systematically establish resonance as a fundamental concept of social philosophy and a social scientific analytic category, on which to build a comprehensive sociology of human relationship to the world. Hence, we must define the building blocks introduced above, of course, in his main study, along with their relation to each other in such a way so as to produce at least as a working definition of resonance as a social theoretical category. Just as we were able to attain a social scientific operationalizable, concept of social acceleration, this was Beschleunigung, from the basic physical concept of acceleration first through a process of generalization, acceleration as increasing quantity per unit of time, followed by more specific differentiation as technological acceleration, acceleration of social change, and acceleration of the pace of life. I would like here to attempt to develop, a second time, we can say, to develop a social scientific category from the physical phenomenon of resonance. So he made the same operation first with the notion of acceleration, and now with the notion of resonance. Just for your information, I had here at home not the physical copy, I have the German one. So the quotes that you have here are from the German, from the Surkamp edition. If you want then the precise references from the English edition, I can give you with no problem in a second time. So, so this is the point of departure, no? And this is a bit what Laura said at the beginning in her presentation, a resonance beyond the musical metaphor. In the case of the concept of resonance, the specific differentiation necessary to make it operational beyond its immediate metaphorical use and to turn it into a tool of conceptualizing our relationship with the world has led to the following articulation. We saw 4 characteristics: being affected, self-efficacy, adaptive transformation, and indisposability. So here I would like to spend a couple of minutes because there is this word, Unverfügbarkeit, and it has been translated in 2 different ways in English. Because Rosa made first the Resonance, the big book, and then he made the Resonancia, and then he made a second compendium, we can say, which is called Unverfügbarkeit, which is a book of 120 pages, which is not just a summary, because it also has some points and some parts that are not developed in the big book of Resonance. The interesting thing is that in English, they translated this word Unverfügbarkeit in 2 different ways in the 2 books, you know, which is not so something to be proud of, I think, because now I go by, so I think that uncontrollability is the way that it was translated in the little book, and inaccessibility is the way that it was translated in the big book. Inaccessibility and uncontrollability. I think that both are not good. So I'm not in mother tongue English, but I take here my risk. And I think that the real right meaning of Unverfügbarkeit is undisposability. It's something that is not a disposal. It's not a disposal. So I think an undisposability, I looked for this word in some other article, and I find, for example, in an article about human rights, when they say that they use this in order exactly to characterize the human rights. And so the human beings are never a disposal. So I would use that. It's my choice, even if I am a simple Italian guy that is speaking a bit of English, but I think that undisposability would be better than either uncontrollability or in inaccessibility, because they mean something different, something that inaccessible is something that they cannot reach. But this is not the point of unverfügbarkeit. On the uncontrollability, this is something different. Unverfügbarkeit is something more than that. So I will use this undisposability. Yeah? This is my choice and my risk. So then we have three axes. So we have four characteristics and three axes: horizontal relationship to people, diagonal relationship to things, and vertical relationship to the world. Along these axes are ordered different spheres of resonance: family, school, art, and so on. So the point is that this articulation has a retroaction on the application of resonance in the musical domain, where it has its literal use. Resonance in the musical field, as generalized and articulated notion, acquires thereby quite different characteristics from resonance understood literally as a purely acoustic musical phenomenon. So here we come to the article that has been translated by you. Martin Felder and Arthur Rosa essay deserves credit for importing this articulation into the musical field, providing a kind of map from which to chart the phenomenon of resonance in its various aspects in the musical domain. In this presentation, I intend to contribute to this project in two ways: by providing three examples of musical resonance along the three identified axes, and by proposing the use of a further notion of that of significance for mapping resonance in the musical domain. Why? Yeah, because why you want to make a significance? So this is the point. So accordingly, the notion of significance denotes areas where resonance has significant effects which traverse both the four aspects and the three axes, including the respective spheres of resonance. Therefore, it cannot be identified with any of them, so it goes through it. Yeah? The example will, I hope, clarify what this entails. This, of course, I use the significance. I could have also, there are other possibilities to use import, for example, yeah, the imports or relevance also. But I use this. Maybe it's just a proposal, but the point is that the field that I will identify here, mnemonic, dialogical, and transcendental, they go through the three axes and go through the four characteristics. So I cannot just engage in any of these. They traverse them. That's why we need another word. So presentation plan, section 1, diagonal axis, Spotify. So I will talk about Spotify. Yeah? This, when I don't know that someone told me the McDonald's of music, and I am quite against this way of characterizing it. And even if McDonald's is not so bad, finally, my daughter likes it a lot better. But anyway, diagonal axis, Spotify, musical flannery, and the mnemonic significance of resonance. So how technology changed our way of dealing with music. This is the object of the first section. The second section, horizontal axis, the improvisational import of musicking. This is this word that has been used by Christopher Small. And the dialogical significance of resonance. And here we will deal with a couple of considerations of Wilhelm Furtwängler, the musical conductor. And in the section 3, a vertical axis, the musical time is temporal structure of indisposability and the transcendental significance of resonance. This is the point that theoretically is it's most probably the most theoretical, that's I put it at the end. This most radical, I would say. Yeah. For me, it was a good to fix this last point. I'm still working on that, but I start now to fix. It's something that I smell I smell the how can you say the flesh, the meat since years, about the story of musical time, because there are many people, we will see also philosophers, and I think that. So I'm happy of what I've been reaching in these last weeks or months on this concept, and I hope that now I started to have a basis on which I can develop. So this is for the section 3. Yeah? So section 1. So we start with Spotify. So I will start with a mail of some years ago from my cousin. My cousin, you say this, sorry, don't take it personally, I make it personal on the contrary, so we go against this way of talking. So this is really an email. This is an email. Actually, I was at work. I couldn't concentrate for the usual reason that there was noise in the office. So I started looking for some Mozart on Spotify. In the past, I had liked the record by Alicia della Rocca, but this time it wasn't working in terms of focusing my attention. Then I did the search, Mozart sonatas. And Roberto Proceda stood out, an Italian name. I started listening. By the way, my cousin is not Italian, he's mother tongue English, and he lives in New Zealand. But he lived many years in Italy, even if he's originally from Trinidad. Then I did a search Mozart sonata, and Roberto Proceda stood out, an Italian name. I started listening, then I liked it. So I went to read the biography and noticed that one of these teachers was Lonquich, Alexander Lonquich, and then I felt like comparing the two pianists, but most of Lonquich's list of albums consists of works by Schumann. By scrolling through the list, I found this album of impressionist pieces. I started listening to Gaspar della Miravella. I couldn't do anything else but sit there, and then I thought of you. We had a lot of contacts. He's also studied piano. We studied piano together. I was not his teacher, but his tutor. Let's put it this way. And so there was this mail from him. No? So this is a real case. This is not even an extreme situation. If some of you navigated through Spotify, you can have a lot of this kind of movements, even much more extreme. You can even go through genre. You continuously make this kind of connections. So now the question is how this technological device changed our way of dealing with music. So the relevance of this mail for this presentation. Such behavior, first of all, such behavior became possible thanks to the internet. So it has essentially to do with the horizontal axis. One could imagine, of course, to do something like this in a bookstore, or even in a CD. You go through the different parts and you look and but really my statement here is that internet changed the game. So since when we can do this stuff, we have another way of accessing musical information, put it in a bad way, but to access music. Not only music, and I'm talking about music, but not only music. So, such behavior is significant for understanding the potential impacts of the internet of our reception of music, regardless of whether users put it into practice. This is very important. It's not really important what actually we with Spotify do, but what we can do with it. This is the main, my opinion, point of Benjamin's famous study about art, about technology and art. He makes an analysis of cinema, for example, that is not, it's based also of some concrete example, but he wants to see what this new technology enables to do, is the potentiality of the technology. So it's possible that 98% of the users of Spotify, they just click and they make just banal things as they would have done it also before. This is not the point. The point is that with this now, I can do this kind of mnemonic connections that did my cousin. I can do it. Before I could not. It was much more difficult. Such behavior can be understood in terms of flânerie. So this is a form of life typical of the 19th century, which Benjamin analyzed in several words. Such an interpretation will make evident how such behavior exemplify what we can call a sort of musical mnemonic resonance. Let's see. Flânerie is a social figure notably analyzed by Benjamin in his writing, in particular in the Passage en Vers. The phenomenon of flânerie constitutes a classic subject in Benjamin's description of social figures from the 19th century, analyzed in several of his works. Another figure is the one of collector, for example, which can also be used in the analysis of musical web exploration and can also constitute a resonance significance. But now we go with Flannery. Digital Flannery is an expression already used in different studies focused on the web's exploration. Several scholars, Skis 2015, Ranzheimer, I did also some stuff on this, Ross and Coopers 2022, have already used the metaphor of Flannery in order to analyze the modalities of the exploration of the digital web. The possibility and the advantage of identifying a series of symptoms of Flannery in Benjamin descriptions. In Benjamin works, it's possible to identify a series of features which characterize the Flannery as heuristic behavior. I will characterize such features as symptoms. This procedure, notably employed by Nelson Goodman in his analysis of the aesthetics, allows to avoid the question of providing the definition of Flannery in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions. So it's not just a cheap solution in order to avoid a problem. Is that sometimes with the excuse that we are not able to provide necessary and sufficient conditions for define something, then we stop our investigation. It makes no sense. So let's start to list some symptoms, some features which characterize some phenomena. So the first symptom of Flannery, the city as a landscape and as interior. Now I quote here Benjamin. This is a very good translation of the passage there. In this case, I have to spend 2 cents for the English translation. Paris created the type of the flaneur, for it is not the foreigners, but they themselves, the Parisians, who have made Paris the promised land of the flaneur, the landscape built of sheer life, as Hofmannsthal once put it. Landscape that, in fact, is what Paris becomes for the flaneur. This is a typical, almost fragmentarian style of Benjamin. Or more precisely, the city splits for him, for the flaneur, into its dialectical poles. It opens to him as a landscape, even as it is closed around him as a room. It is beautiful. So it's the idea that, well, whoever, I'm from Milan, so Milan is not New York, but in any case, or it's not even Buenos Aires, it's much smaller, but it has this, when you walk on a city, on a big city, particularly if you pertain to this city, you have this, exactly this impression. So you are at the same time like the promeneur solitaire. So you are with no direction. You go and you look what's happened, but you are at home. You know, you are not, you are, it's your city. That's very interesting. Again, it is wonderful that in Paris itself, one can actually wander through countryside. So the other side of the moat is too touched on. For it, Flannery can transform Paris into one great interior, a house whose rooms are the quartiers, no less clearly demarcated by the thresholds than are the real rooms. Then, on the other hand, the city can appear to someone walking through it to be without thresholds, a landscape in the round. So this is what. So I think that this metaphorically more or less applies to Spotify. Spotify is a musical virtual landscape and interior. On the one side, Spotify is a sort of musical landscape where one can walk around as a promeneur solitaire. We know this figure also that was is a counterpart in the German literature in the Wanderer von Eichendorff. It has a lot of fortune also in music with Schubert, of course. And it's a very important figure. It's part of still nowadays, I think. Even if here in Switzerland, you have this idea of wandering as an experience of life. You are not a real human being if you didn't do that at least once in your life. There is this idea, more or less explicitly in the mind of people. And we have this, no? So we saw the way that my cousin behaved. It was a walking through the music. It was a walking through the music. But on the other side, Spotify appears as an interior. Both as home environment, we can build our musical interior. We can make our playlists. We can make it as we like. And the space we can be demarcated by different thresholds, of course. This is also interesting because this homey, the question of the homey character of internet, of Spotify in this case, is very important, I think, for the question of ethics, also of algorithms nowadays, you know, because the algorithms, I think that they work on that, on the fact that we produce, so when we put in place our familiar connection, we feel well. And so the famous story of the cocoons and this kind of stuff has to do with this. Feel at home. Feel at home. So now this is very actual. So this is the first symptom. The second symptoms of flannery, the colportage phenomenon. And this is the virtuosismus of Benjamin. And the colportage phenomenon of space is the flanneur's basic experience. Thanks to this phenomenon, everything potentially taking place in this one single room is perceived simultaneously. The space winks at the flaneur. What do you think may have gone on here? These quotes are always, you know that the quotes of Passagenberg is with these letters, which are very good for me. It's very easy to identify. We'll use more also for other books. So, Spotify space is virtual musical colportage. The virtual space of Spotify is a place where everything is available and can theoretically become an object of experience, arranged in an unstructured manner. It is up to us to structure this space through our search strategies. Spotify virtual musical colportage represents a rupture from our previous experiences of musical space. For decades, we've been accustomed to thinking of the space of musical goods through the metaphor of the archive, divided into genres. Entering into Spotify, where the virtual coexistence of every musical genre precisely creates the effect of colportage in musical space, constitutes a rupture, a break with the past in this sense. We can access everything without any limitation of external mediation. It's up to us to create, to orient ourselves. It's much more than what we see in a mall, you know, because there was already the mall before. It's not the same. Because in the mall, in any case, we find already a reconstituted archive, you know. Nolens volens is there. It's not so fluid as in Spotify. Spotify really does what you, of course, then there is the album, of course. There are the, you are continuously, you receive continuously advices from the algorithms about what music to listen to. But this is another question. It can be, I'm not now dealing with this. But the question is that the shop, so the algorithm is like the seller in the mall, you know, the seller. Right? But the shop is totally unstructured, you know. You can with the keywords, you can go wherever you want, you know, and you feel free in this. The third symptom of flannery, involuntary memory as a heuristic procedure. This is the point. But the great reminiscence, this is again about the flaneur. This is a bit crazy. It seems under effect of fashion or something, but it's interesting. But the great reminiscence is the historical shadow. These are the trumpery which he, the flaneur, leaves to tourists who would think thereby to gain access to the genius loci with a military password. Our friend will keep silent. The flaneur. At the approach of his two footsteps, the place aroused, speechlessly, mindlessly, its mere intimate nearness gives him hints and instructions. He stands before Notre Dame de Lorette, and these souls remember. Here is the spot where in former times the Cheval de Renfort, the spare horse, were harnessed to the omnibus that climbed to the Rue des Martyrs toward Montmartre. Often he would have given all he knows about the domicile of Balzac or of Gavarni, about the sites of a surprise attack or even of a barricade. He would have given all this to be able to catch the scent of a threshold or to recognize a paving stone by touch, like any watchdog. This kind of way of behaving, I don't know if it's true or if he imagined he's talking about himself, maybe, Benjamin. He talked about at one moment in another passage of anamnestic intoxication. Anamnestic intoxication is the expression. So involuntary memory in Flannery and Dominio Musical heuristic in Spotify. What's happened? Okay, sorry. The flaneur doesn't move following a predetermined imposed order. Instead, he establishes an order through mnemonic resonances. Also, he talks about the principle of Flannery in Proust, for example, in Marcel Proust, on the Baudelaire correspondence situated in the medium of memory. Similarly, one navigates through the web music by allowing various mnemonic processes to act, analogies, metaphors, childhood memories, and so on. This is what already my cousin did. So, the adoption of self-Flannery behaviors in the musical domain, including classical music, constitutes a form of colonization. Traditionally, musical work, especially classical ones, represented a realm characterized by what has been called aesthetic contemplation, Wackenroder, a kind of meditative immersion due to both their complexity and an aesthetics of music that developed particularly in the 19th century. The ability to quickly move from one musical work to another seems incompatible with the typical attitude of contemplative immersion required when engaging with classical musical works, institutionalized this behavior by silence and darkness in the concert hall. This was the traditional way that we are used to listen to music till 20 years ago. So now we transpose to Spotify a way of almost distracted behavior from other kind of music to the classical music. Such colonization involves, however, paradoxically also an emancipatory aspect, not only as it represents a process of democratization, I refer here to Böhme, also studies of Flannery, where some social behaviors are adopted by social classes that were previously excluded from them, but also because it allows to deconstruct the dispositive of institutionalized reception constituted by the right of classical concept. It's also, I'm not saying it's also an opportunity. Of course, this involves a risk of commodification. That's why, the McDonald's of, this is the McDonald's of classical music, which is quite a banal, everyone knows. But to stop to this consideration is quite superficial, I think. But this is also true for the traditional behaviors adopted in the musical classical domain, as classically shown by Pierre Bourdieu in the classical study distinction. So the commodification is not just came with Spotify. Also, the concert hall classical music was mainly used as cultural capital, as Bourdieu said. So we are not saved from capitalism just because we go to the concert hall and we stay with our nice bourgeois friends in religious silence. We are not, it's not a free ticket for emancipation. In any case, it involves also opportunities, also in terms of heuristic resonance. So this, there are risks, but there are also opportunities. Yeah? So heuristic of association has mnemonic significance of resonance. So here we arrive. I take a bit of a long way, but I hope that it was worth. So Benjamin's interpretation of Baudelaire's correspondence. It would be an error to think of the experience contained in the correspondence as a simple counterpart to certain experiments with synesthesia, with hearing colors and or seeing sounds that have been conducted in psychologists' laboratories. In Baudelaire's case, it is a matter less of the well-known reaction about which apex of snobbish art criticism has made such a fuss, than of the medium in which such reactions occur. This medium is the memory, and with Baudelaire, it was possessed of unusual density. I found here another, as a further argument for how the resonance can have this mnemonic significance. In Diderot, this is from a study from Previsits. Resonance in Diderot's central figure of analogy and thought, a figure which by being conveyed purely through acoustic media apparently functions without direct physical contact, thus being able to serve as the best model for an abstractly conceived form of thought. Starting from a model of perception, Diderot, as a character in his dialogue with D'Alembert, arrives at the model of resonance to explain the fact that thoughts sometimes follow each other incomprehensibly. A newly awakened idea can sometimes provoke a sympathetic response in a harmonic that is almost inconceivably remote. à l'intervalle incompréhensible. So, now here you could say, but resonance is not just an echo. We know that. So this metaphor of Diderot could be misleading, because the resonance as studied, as analyzed by Rosa, is much more than a simple physical response. At the end, we could see that this analogy, would interpret that as a physical, like, response between neurons. We can maybe study it also neurological point of view. So this is not the point. This is not the story of resonance. The story of resonance is much more articulated than that. We wanted to go over the metaphor, as said. But I think that I want to insist, we can find the 4 aspects of resonance in the heuristic of association. So this is my argument. And by being affected, in order to be associatively recalled, things must affect us somehow. The trace kept in our memory is the effect corresponding to our having been affected. Self-efficacy. In the case here we've taken into exams, association is not a physical automatic mechanism, but a cultural active gesture by which we couple different objects, often pertaining to heterogeneous fields. It calls for an active involvement. We make association in order to orient ourselves in an unstructured space. Like Cousin, he could do all these connections because of cultural. So his memories were not just physical memories of events. It was connections that were also continuously mediated by his cultural experience, by his culture, in the sense not of a culture, in the sense of a social phenomenon, taking part of the community and so on. Adaptive transformation. In this heuristic exercise, the different spaces of knowledge are continuously reconfigured according to different kinds of associations, such as analogical, allegorical, metaphorical, just to mention 3 of them. Such form of association can be understood not only in terms of creative imagination, but also as declination of heuristic resonance. So we reconfigure our space of knowledge also by doing that. Playlists, when done in a particular way, can be reconfiguration of epistemological spaces. Indisposability, that's my Invertbarkeit. The heuristic is not a method to orient, ourselves. There are not necessary and sufficient steps in order to reach the target. Rather, the activation of reminiscence, Erinnerung, is a sort of event which is exposed to continuity. You cannot say, if you do that and that and that, it happens, it happens. Whatever wrote my Cousin is not necessary. It's a sequence of events, but is not governed by necessary sufficient condition. It's just an event. So there are, we can say, necessary condition, but not sufficient. So this is for the end of the section 1, and now we go in section 2. Improvisational studies. So this section 2, horizontal axis, the improvisational import of musicking and dialogical significance of resonance. Improvisational studies in performing arts. Just an introduction. Improvisation is an activity which characterizes almost every aspect of our life. For example, I think that there is a mistake. The almost totality of the conversation that we have with other people are partially or sometimes totally improvised. We don't plan in advance what we will say in the conversation. And even when we plan it, the conversation can take different directions than the ones envisioned. In this sense, Socratic dialogues are the way to provide the written presentation of such improvisational character. So it's important for the philosophy that the first important, I don't say the first, but the first eminent and quantitatively also important document of Western philosophy is writing down an improvisational performance. This is the ambition, at least. Sometimes it sounds a bit scholastic when you have the partner that is not so active, in the first dialogues particularly. But I mean, the idea is that behind that, to see how the thought is a thinking like music is music king. It's a process, which starts from a question in the case, and we don't know where we will live. If we know already, it's a fake. If we start a conversation that we know already where to go, this is not a conversation, it's manipulation. A conversation must be something where we don't know what will come out of that. This is not just a question of Sollen, you know, of ethical. It's just, we should define like that conversation. It's not that there is good and bad conversation. A conversation that is not like this is not conversation. It's another thing. In spite of such evident relevance of improvisation in our daily lives, this field of study has been almost ignored, also in the philosophical study, till the end of last century. Maybe I exaggerate, but it was really not, it has not an important place. Studies on improvisation have, especially in the last 20 years, originated from the performing arts, such as theater and the vocal music. So we have this story. This is a bit, you know, that improvisation is a very general phenomenon, but it's been not so much investigated. And when it started to be investigated, it's about music and theater. Music, mostly, it's jazz and theater. But actually, it's much more than that. So now, of course, it's started to go to invade. As a result, researchers focused on those genres or subgenres where improvisation was predominant. In the case of music, jazz, particularly the field of pre-improvisation, has by far been the most analyzed subject. Now, the point is now that I found some interesting consideration of Willem Furtwängler about improvisation in musical performance, which go against this, because the idea, there is how can I say, a rhetoric of musical improvisation, particularly from Christopher Small, for example, a storytelling, let's put it this way. Now I simplify, but it was like this, you know. The classical music, so the praxis of classical music was based on a notation, on a musical work, and the interpreter has just to execute. It was an executor. It has even sometimes to try to understand the intention of the author or whatsoever, you know. And it was mainly a musical praxis which was betraying the essence of music. Music should not be like this. Music is mainly is in creation and improvisation. And we, as Western citizens, have been used for 2, 3, 4 centuries to a way of making music which is almost destroying this aspect of music. And now, on the contrary, okay, jazz, but also other kind of musical, ethnic music and so on, we are able to rediscover this original source of music, you know, which is improvisation. This is a bit the storytelling. And Willem Furtwängler, which didn't know, of course, Christopher Small, because he died before, but ante litteram destroyed for me this storytelling, you know, mainly. Because he says that the most disastrous consequence of the lack of unified sense in the narrowing and limitation of the improvisational element in music performance as a whole. The less each individual musician collaborates autonomously and harmoniously, the more the intended pedagogic dynamic nuances and so on by the conductor must either be completely omitted or achieved through what can be likened to purely mechanical means, that is, through numerous rehearsal, endless drilling. Yet the most important and best aspect, namely the imperceptible variability of tempo and colors, cannot be achieved through mechanical means or rehearsals in any way. Often in this way, the significant time spent on rehearsal works becomes, for reasons related to the composition of the orchestra, a much more fatal necessity than with an orchestra of natural unity of skill. Thus, in its exaggeration, in excessive rehearsing, lies the danger of completely killing the improvisational element, a danger that is at least as disastrous for the conductor as it is for the orchestra. The possibility of rehearsing ad infinitum, which is sometimes presented as a special advantage, necessarily diminishes the sensitivity and thus the quality of the conductor's technique, as well as the psychological sensitivity of the orchestra, which becomes accustomed to a typically uningenious mechanical approach. So, he talks mainly that there is so what he's saying is that there is an improvisational character in the musical. So Furtwängler was the typical musician that in Christopher's music was targeted. He was playing, conducting the classical works, the canon of Western musical tradition. He was conducting, he was also analyzing, he was a Schenkerian, so he was giving a big importance to the structure provided by the musical score, and so on. And still, he says, in the musical performance, there is an improvisational character, which is important, is vital for it. And we cannot kill it. We should not. So what is talking about? So this is the question. What is this? So we have to understand what it means, make some first differentiation. Improvisation as a genre versus improvisation as an activity. First, in the field of music, which is our focus, the first differentiation concerns improvisation as a genre versus improvisation as an activity. An artist can improvise upon request on a given theme, a practice popular throughout the 19th century. Yeah? It was typical. You have also in some, I think in some movies, Beethoven was a great improviser. Yeah? On the other hand, the performer who is interpreting a piece of music can make improvisational decisions on spot for various reasons. In some aspects, an artist may not improvise during the performance of an improvisational genre, while completely improvising during the execution of a musical work. So this I'm putting a bit in a paradoxical way. In the two extreme, I can have an improvisation which is done totally mechanically. Sometimes the Dixieland is like this. You know? It's so regulated by cliché that nothing happens. Really, we know already what's going to happen. So in theory, it's an improvisation. Practically, it's all already decided before by patterns. Huh? And on the other side, I can have an interpretation of a musical work in a concert hall, which is totally improvised, because that day, the interpreter already said that I never want to interpret the same way every evening. I want always to change something. So in theory, I can have an interpretation which is totally improvised and an improvisation which is not at all improvised. So we have to differentiate these two. Second differentiation, improvisation extempore versus improvisation impromptu. Lydia Gore, very important. So when musicians make up music in performance, from this moment forward, their act falls under, the familiar umbrella concept of what I'm calling improvisation extempore. We start now a jam session. The second, less familiar concept, I'm calling improvisation impromptu. The latter refers to what we do at a singular moment, in the moment, when we are put on the spot, particularly when we are confronted with unexpected difficulty or obstacles. This can happen, for example, in chamber music, when a partner takes, for example, a theme. It happened to me many times, or I also provoke that unconscious, or also conscious. You know, today we played, langsam, less quick. You know, how can you say? Okay, langsam, it's clear. So your partner take a theme in a totally different way, and you have to respond. You cannot just say, no, you cannot say it's wrong. Take it quicker, because we rehearse in the other way. You know? And so you have to respond. You know? So this is a kind of. So now, which kind of improvisation is the one that is talking Wilhelm Furtwängler when he says the improvisational character? Let's see. Excessive technical control, that is the uniformly executed technical perfection of all details, which as such present a completely different aspect than what the creators who conceived them as a part of the whole intended, prevents their intellectual connection to the whole. The naturally productive path on which the details are seen and interpreted through the whole is reversed. The improvisational element, again, loses its essence, indeed, its very concept. Improvisation, which is not a mere accident, a quality that one may or may not possess, but rather the very source of all great creative and necessary music making. He's talking about interpreting, he's not talking about jam session. He's talking about playing, conducting the the fifth of Beethoven, the typical example. So what is here about? I would say the improvisation that Furtwängler talks about is evidently not impromptu. He's not talking about that every day it's possible that, yeah, the acoustic is not what we expected and so on. It's not a momentary or accessory element, but essentially characterizes the entire musical performance. This is the point of Furtwängler. This element does not concern whether the musical performance is an improvisation as a genre, but whether it is a performance. This is the point. It's a performance. It is the very act of music making, musizieren, musicking, when done appropriately, that carries within itself the improvisational element as its essential part. So what is the improvisational element of musical performance and therefore exemplary characteristic of resonance? What Furtwängler calls as improvisatorische, implicitly described as the musician's ability to respond adequately or technically, emotionally, and cognitive levels to what happens during the performance, embodies the four exemplary characteristics of resonance. Being affected, the musician must possess a certain sensitivity, being moved by the musical proposal of the conductor, or in the case of chamber music, by other musicians. Self-efficacy, this sensitivity is only the starting point. The improvisational element begins precisely when the musician actively responds to what is happening and has in some way affected them. Without such responsiveness, it remains at the level of pure perception without action. Adaptive transformation. In this musical response, the musician must also be able to transform their previous interpretation of the musical piece, rehearsed with an orchestra or other musician, into a new one, arising from such interaction with other musicians. Indisposability, again, in this process, what happens cannot be predicted, let alone directed in advance. There is a radical element of contingency that makes every musical performance executed with this attitude something unique, and therefore an act of improvisation. We have to say also that indisposability means also that things can go also wrong, you know. It's not felicitous, you know. It's not that every time that I improvise something comes out very well, you know. It can also go, there is a famous situation about, I think, I go by heart, Richard Strauss conducting the Tannhäuser, I think. It's quoted in this book of Leibowitz, you know. Les compositeurs sont doubles. And he said that at one moment, I think it was Richard Strauss, decided on the spot to take a very slower tempo. And it was a disaster. The orchestra made a disaster. And then it came out, so never again, never again. So this, of course, so this is just a technical, but sometimes even if technically we are able, the musicians are able to stand the situation, but it can also, out of interpretation aspect, can be also not felicitous. So there is this indisposability, and there is not the sure way to make things happen in the felicitous way. You take a risk. You always take a risk. You take a risk on purpose, not impromptu. You decide to take a risk. This is the point of Furtwängler. Extempore, you take a risk. I go on the stage and I will take all the risk involved in this. So the dialogical significance of musical performance is improvisatory and thereby resonant performance. Gadamer's conception of dialogue as resonant process. I refer here to Varieté method. To reach an understanding in a dialogue, is not merely a matter of putting oneself forward and successfully asserting one's own point of view, but being transformed into communion in which we do not remain what we were. This guy, which is normally seen as a very traditionalist and so on. This is a performative idea of dialogue. Transforming power of dialogue. Communion as a result of an in-between also. So see this, the cliche by which we normally understand Gadamer are falsified by this passage. Communion as a result of resonance, the partners of a dialogue listen to, are affected by each other, respond to each other, are transformed by this process, whose direction and final result are indisposable. So resonant musical performance is dialogical discipline. The resonant musical performance is not only responsivity to what happens, but also capacity of collaborating autonomously and harmoniously. This is for Wenger. Such harmonious collaboration also details the interpersonal skills required in a dialogue, where the aboutness of understanding corresponds to the achieved common interpretive performance of a musical work. In this respect, the notion of resonance acquires a dialogical significance. Making music together, musicking, and eminently in chamber music constitutes not only an example, but also an exercise in which dialogical skills are both developed and disciplined. Discipline of listening, listening to that, and responding to what you listen in a competent way. There is an aboutness. As I cannot, if I'm playing the trio of Brahms, I cannot take decisions which are out of, so I have to respond according to what I'm playing. So also in a dialogue, I have to respond according to what we are talking about. If not, we continuously go and we never reach a point. We have to stay on the point. The Socrates dialogues are continuously showing this process. Let's go back to the point. The aboutness. So now this is we move in the section 3. In the section 3, I will, it's partially a son of the last conference that I had with you, because I was, it was quoted about, it was mentioned, these lessons of Mahler, of Bernstein about Mahler's fifth. So Leonard Bernstein analysis of ambiguity in Mahler's Adagietto. We started. This is section 3 is about the vertical axis, musical time as temporal structure of indisposability and the transcendental significance of resonance. So we start with this analysis of Bernstein. Oh, yeah, okay, I have here the quotes. Mahler's Fifth Symphony, ever since Death in Venice invaded the silver screen. Why this? Oh, there is something. There is something missing here. So he says here that we can recognize this theme. He's playing this theme. He's playing the theme, and he's saying, "What is this?" We recognize here. This is Mahler's Fifth Symphony. We recognize this, and we recognize this ever since Death in Venice invaded the silver screens, became very popular. Why this wound? Why with this wound about that? After all, it's nothing but dominant leading to a tonic, 3 conventional upbeats in F major leading to an appoggiatura downbeat, which then resorts again in the most conventional way. So he says, when we listen to this theme, we are almost hypnotized. Why? So why? I mean, at the end, it's a very simple, almost banal harmonic progression. Then what is the magic secret? Ambiguity. This is the point of his lesson, ambiguity. Which ambiguity is exalt and disposability. We don't know where it goes. As if you didn't know, and more than just dualistic ambiguity. You see, all that preliminary vamping on the harp is first of all syntactically vague. We have no idea what beat we are on or what meter we are in. What's more, the harp is setting up the key of the piece, F major, but suggesting its tonic triad, but only suggesting it, because the fundamental note, the root of that triad, the F itself, is missing. Only 2/3 of the triad is given us, the A and the C, reduplicated in several octaves. It's true, but still only 2 different notes. So we are not really sure that our key is going to be F major. That omission, the absence of that tonic, makes us only possibly aware of F major, because the 2 notes we hear could turn out to be 2/3 of a whole other triad, namely A minor. Automatically, we are facing another ambiguity. Which of the 2 keys are we? In A minor or F major? So at the beginning, we don't know yet where we are going to go, which is we are like the wanderer, We are not yet sure what will be our seal. As the 3 beats begin, we almost vote for the A minor, because there's the A in the cello part, which seems to predominate. But no, it sneakily descends to G. And then when the bass is confirmed, they descend to F. Oh, it feels so good. And says, oh, it feels so good. Eh? We are home in F major, but there's still an unresolved tug the heart in that appoggiatura up there in the melody. And when it resolves, we just melt away with pleasure of fulfillment. So this is his analysis. Here we have the point where we are in the doubt. Maybe we are in A minor, but then through the progression we arrive. You see here the A goes to S, to G. And then we have still this appoggiatura, and then we arrive at the end to F. So, why is all this interesting for resonance? I will make an excursus through Dilthey. This is, maybe this could be an idea for a next, I don't know if it's already translated. This is an essay of Dilthey on, über musikalisches Verstehen, glaube ich, on musical understanding. It's not so long, maybe, anyway. And he makes this analysis. We have merely a work before us, one that in order to endure must be fixed in some part of space, whether in notes, in letters, or a phonogram, or originally in a remembrance. What is fixed in this way is an ideal explication of a process, or a musical or poetic nexus of lived experience. Now, at the point. And what do we observe here? Parts of the whole that develop and move forward in time. In each part, there is an operative, what we call a tendency. Tone follows upon tone and aligns itself with it according to the laws of our tonal system. This system leaves open infinite possibilities. This is the point of Bernstein, ambiguity, or can be many things. But in the direction of one of these possibilities, tones proceed in such a way that earlier ones are conditioned by subsequent ones. This is very important. What happens after gives sense to what happened before. There is a beautiful passage of Dewey in Arthur's Experience where he makes this same point about the syllogism in thinking. And he says, we normally think of syllogisms as we have the two premises before, and then we have the conclusions. But actually it's not like this, he says. The premises become premises only when we reach the conclusion. The conclusion is the point, is the resolution that makes appear the premises as premises. So what happens in this final stage gives sense to what happened before. A descending line strives for resolution. You see, it is conditioned by this endpoint, and yet it also conditions it. Everywhere free possibility. Nowhere in this conditioning is there necessity. There is something like a mutual consent between figures that attract and then repel each other. It would be presumptuous to think that we could in any way know why a second phrase follows up on the first, just in the way it does with such a new harmonic nuance, or it's transforming such a variation or embellished with this figure. There is a having to be thus in this sequence. It involves not necessity, but rather the actualization of an aesthetic value. This is so precise. When we arrive there to this F, we have an aesthetic value. It's not just beauty. It can be more than that. We can characterize this resolution in many ways. We should not think that what follows at a certain point could not have gone differently. Could have gone differently, of course. We see here a tendency inherent in creation toward what reflection calls the beautiful or sublime. Okay. So, last two slides. The retroactive. So now we go from ambiguity to indisposability. So the point is that here that Bernstein focused on this notion of ambiguity, and I want to further develop this in the notion of undisposability, the retroactive form of musical time. The notion of retroaction has been notably employed by Ted Gioia to characterize the kind of procedure in place in musical improvisation, but generally in any form of improvisation. Oh, there is a missing bracket. The blueprint method is mostly clearly represented, as one might gather from its name, in architecture. Here, the artist plans in advance every detail of the work of art before beginning any part of its execution. Improvisation follows not the blueprint method, but the retrospective method. The improviser might be unable to look ahead at what he's going to play, but he can look behind at what he has just played. Thus, each new musical piece can be shaped with relation to what has gone before. The consideration of will and detail allows us to appreciate how this characteristic relates also to musical works. It is a sort of indirect confirmation of Schoenberg's statement that composition is a slowdown improvisation. So the point is that, of course, the musical work is written, you know, it's a plan. But we will see it's the way how we experience this. It's like if it is improvised, you know. If not, it would not be. We would not understand why we can still find interest in listening to a musical work that we already listened many times. We know already how it's finished, you know. I mean, we know already what is finished. Why we listen again and again and again? We know already that you start the Patetica, we know already, okay, the beginning is tragic, but at the end it finished more or less, yeah, it's not so bad. But we follow the beginning, we are always with this beginning. And so what's happening now? And it is because of this structure of time that analyzed it. So the improvisation makes it evident, something that is actually implicit in every form of musical time. This is the point of Dilthey. So, musical time is a simplification of transcendental significance of resonance. Dilthey's analysis allows to identify specific transcendental dimension of music. Time assumes in music a specific form, which assumes the connotation of undisposability. And the musical time is something that we don't know what's going to happen. Both the notion of ambiguity and the one of retroactivity point out one specific characteristic of musical time. The next step is always potentially unexpected. Can always bring a surprise. The future in musical time is radically open. It's not a simple realization of something already given in the past. This does not mean that there is no normativity. As Dilthey points out, we can a posteriori state that things had to be thus, but they could have been also different. It is this temporal structure which gives the musical time a specific resonant character, not only because it is undisposable, but also because thereby it invites us to a participated attention, where we are both sensitive and responsive to what is happening, making of a musical listening a transformative experience, where we are in resonant relation with the world. This is the point that I'm interested in. Right? We are fascinated by what's happening exactly, even if we listen already 200 times, and we go to listen 201 times a particular musical work. And we are fascinated. At that moment, we forget ourselves, and we are just there. Why? So there's been a lot of stuff about the aesthetic attitude, and there's been a lot of criticism of that. We have to be in a religious, you know, also rock and roller and so on. I think that the reason is not in us, it's outside, in the structure, it's an ontological reason, in the structure of musical time. It's for this reason that we are fascinated. Because it has particular structure, which is not where the progression acquires sense through it, you know. Music is always an event, not out of emotional or sociological, or psychological, but rather out of transcendental reasons. So time is transcendental, so Kant, as it is a resonant declination of time. Thereby it exemplifies the transcendental significance of resonance. Thank you many times for your patience. I hope not to have been talking too long.
Thank you so much, Marcello. No, it was not too much at all. Well, now we will open the floor, as we said at the beginning, for the Q&A session, or if you have comments, opinions. There's a message in the chat. While please you let me know if you have any comments or questions. Oscar Iglesias on the chat is thanking Marcello for transmitting these navigations and how to be in them. He is telling us that he has to go, and he says, thank you, Marcello, an extraction task of the factic impression to feel, to think, to be, to reason. What's alive, resonance, and repercussions. That's Oscar's message. Yes, Carlos, please go ahead. Thank you, Marcelo. I would like to ask you a couple of questions. I'll speak Spanish, right? Okay. The first question is, in the composition, in the musical composition, when the composer is writing the work, the music, what's the incidence or impact of the resonance that his own resonance, and therefore that return to the musical past, his own work, how much does this impact the musical composition that he's or she is working on right now? Well, I'm not a composer. I've done some studies on composing, and I was not very talented from the artistic perspective. Ivan Federer was my professor, and then he taught composition in Strasbourg. He was my first piano teacher and then composition teacher as well. So I think that yes, I can imagine that yes, in the composition act, the aspects in which resonance might have a role, these are many aspects. One is what you mentioned, the relationship to what they have done, what they have composed before. And then this is interesting, I think, because that is related to composers, because you might distinguish, and this is related to the history of music. And since Beethoven, even though this might sound cliche, since Beethoven, it is thought that each work is different from what happened in the past. In Mozart, there's still a remaining style that can be recognized. In Beethoven, if you listen to the first compositions or the last quartets, it's very hard to know if it's the same composer, but that's not it. Because in Schubert, for example, there's a very clear style to identify him. And then there are composers who wrote a lot that were maybe repetitive. So there we might think that there are different ways to relate with the past. One of them is the idiomatic way, i.e., there will be a certain language that sort of belongs to a historical and cultural time.
Okay. You can, so this can be one dimension. Another dimension is the Beethovenian dimension, Beethoven's dimension, the discovery dimension. So in this case, we need to decline or inflect the different modalities with which a composer may relate with his past when he's composing something. So how does he relate to his past? I believe that there are different ways. One of them can be highly idiomatic or not repetitive. I am not talking about the Stravinsky way. The same might be said about Bach. There is a predominance of language there, the linguistic factor, and there are other examples as well. So I believe the answer is yes, but we should ask the various composers, the different composers about that. And each composer may have their own particular way, but I'm sure that it depends on the direction of the question. Mnemonic connections may play a huge role as well. I'm not a composer, but I believe that the answer would be yes. When I am writing, which is the only compositional activity that I perform, that is what happens. You write something new by virtue of associations that you have made in your past, and that is a process that reiterates itself. So the novelty, not always, but novelty, I mean, this is the point. The novelty does not happen in contradiction with memory. Memory is repetition, but that is what enables to move forward with composition. I think that that applies to music as well, at a level that is not so conscious, because in the case of music, connections happen more immediately, in a more immediate fashion. So that's with regard to immediacy is related to concepts, but modestly, I would say that you should pose that question, you should ask that question to composers. To what extent do they think that their capacity or their ability is well designed for this concept of resonance? You mentioned quartets and you mentioned Beethoven. It would seem that Beethoven is a totally different composer when it comes to his quartets. So this rupture, this breakup, so to speak, this introduction, so to speak, of this new way of expressing music, how much does resonance work there to enable the breakup for between what Beethoven had been doing so far and this remarkable change that led many people to be unable to recognize that this piece, this quartet piece, was by Beethoven. It was so different, right? So yes, that is what I wanted to suggest with composers like Beethoven. Beethoven is paradigmatic, but same thing for Schoenberg. Schoenberg evolved in a radical way throughout his career. So surely the stylistic revolutions that happen with these authors, with these composers, are not just the results of let's do it like this posture. It's not like a let's go crazy kind of thing. It's always as well a consequence of a relationship, or of their relationship with the past. So it's a reaction to what they have already written. So it's a reaction that is not idiomatic or linguistic. I think, I don't know how to put my finger on it. It's progressive, maybe. It's ongoing. It's the ongoing search for something that search for the future, maybe. I don't know. We should find the right word for that, but it's clear. You may imagine that oftentimes we have a relationship with our past that pushes us to change, that compels us to change. It compels us to change, and this is not necessarily a rejection. It could be a rejection, it might be a rejection, but the revolution, we should give the concept of revolution from a theoretical significance standpoint is not incompatible with a relationship with the past. It's a relationship or a reaction that searches to or that strives to establish a discontinuity with the past. That does not mean that Beethoven disliked his previous symphonies, but clearly there is a will to break up with the past and introduce a pathos for novelty, for creativity, in favor of creativity. So I think the answer is yes. The concept of resonance right there can help us to find words and concepts to explain this particular inflection for the relationship with the past, an inflection or a declination that is not linguistic, but rather a continuous and ongoing search for something new. Marcello, I'm sorry that I'm monopolizing the Q&A, but right there, I'm asking that there is a certain play or a game between the rational domain of writing and unavailability. There is this play or indisposability. There is a sort of a game between indisposability having to do with this, with what is the unexpected, and how the unexpected, or so to speak, the composer is led to that by music itself. I'm just thinking about poetic writing, right? Poetic writing of modern lyrical poetry. There is a musicality of language that brings us to the listening of something that is unavailable, something that is an insight in a way, that is a phenomenon that comes up led but what will come, but led but by the unexpected. This is something that cannot be completely available. Actually, it is unavailable by definition, and writing is an opening up to the possibility of the unavailable to barge in. My answer is this one. I am not sure that this dimension of unavailability, I do not think that writing has been the event that produced that. I choose to be neutral there. What I do agree with, because, well, there is a trend towards the rhetorics of performativity and materiality as opposed to hermeneutics, rhetorics. But there are people that say, well, but not everything is about comprehension, but rather there is a material aspect that goes hand in hand with all of that. And oftentimes, there is going to be a connection between that material aspect and what is unavailable, what is brought to the device. So, well, it's about this idea. And I think it's slightly banal for me. I think that especially when it comes to conceptual production, for philosophical production, for example. As you said, there's also a piece of information that is purely biographic. The phenomenology of Hegel had been thought about as another piece, and as he was writing, it became something else. Hegel did not know about this at the beginning. He wanted to do something else. This is purely biographic. So the plan that he had at the beginning was failed, and in the meantime, it morphed into something else, and that is what gave significance to what he had written. So there is a procedure that is musical, but which also applies eminently, in my opinion, to poetic writing, certainly, but also to conceptual writing, not just poetic writing. Any piece which has relevance, has this element to itself, because otherwise it might have been created by anyone else. If we are so prone to respecting the philosophical canon, Plato, Socrates, etc., it is because we believe that without this canon, we would never have made it to that point. It was not available. Without this event, which has been the production of this philosophical corpus, it does not need to limit itself to continental philosophy. We might also mention Kripke when he said it is not true that Hitler was by fate predestined to be the devil. In another world, in another universe, he might have been an Austrian peasant. So this is almost a word of forgiveness, right, for Hitler. But it is something that when you read it, you say, without Kripke, we may never have arrived at that point. So that is why I believe that this unavailability or indisposability concerns writing, and eminently conceptual writing. I think that this might be a characteristic of all cultural devices, not in the sense of high culture, or not in the sense of cultural capital by Bourdieu, but rather what anything that is cultural. I'm not saying that nature does not have it. Nature may have it as well, but I believe that it's a signature of human culture. What happens, it's this, right? What happens is not available. It is not right there. So someone or something needs to bring this to light. So it is worth saying that this involves writing as well, and particularly we might even say that without writing, we never might have been able to compose music along these lines. Well, maybe you wanted to get there, right? Without writing, we never might have imagined creating music in this sense, in this way, in the sense that was mentioned before. Thank you. Okay, we have a few more minutes. In the meantime, maybe someone would like to ask questions or share comments. When we translated the article, Marcello, we had to make a decision with regard to translating Unverfügbarkeit. That took quite a bit of time, unavailability. And one of the possibilities that came up was the one that you yourself offered today. And I think that it is an aspect worth noting, this character of the unexpected, the unsuspected, something that is not available, but the ingredient of surprise, the fact that in the case of improv, for example, the event showing up without the person having composed this, having counted on it, but rather that there should be an element that the composer did not count on. He was not expecting it. It is the unexpected. So we spent quite a bit of time discussing, well, the noun is just night. It has to do with unavailability or indisposability for unverfügbarkeit. But when we use the adjective in German, and the article speaks about what you were mentioning, and improvisation for jazz bands, for example, this component, this characteristic or this character of the unsuspected or unforeseen in a way, and how the listener needs to be available, because rather, if not, we would not allow ourselves to be surprised. We would not allow ourselves to be acted upon or operated upon by that event that is happening. So the unavailability or indisposability of listening, it is right there that we may see that coming up, the unforeseen. So I think that this is a complex word, because we should allow for the whole breadth of signification, right? What unverfügbarkeit means, it's not available, okay, but in order to make it available, the listener needs to be available. And then it's about improvising, as the conversation said, that is to say, allowing yourself to be led to along the directions offered by the conversation, rather than imposing our perspective. So we might use a parallel with a conversational model, that is to say, Garber's conversational model, which is an attempt to explain improvisation. So to pose this question as to when unverfügbar is an adjective, and playing with this ambivalence, the unforeseen, what surprises us, that which we do not count on. I am not an English speaker by birth, and English is not my mother tongue, so I need to be honest on that score. I was thinking that the two translations that were proposed were not just right. Because uncontrollability and unaccessibility, those two were words I didn't like so much, and that is something different altogether. So without accessibility, resonance is not such. If I do not have accessibility to an event, I will not be able to have any resonance. So in the musical domain, it is true. It's true that the unavailable manifests itself as the unforeseen. I could never have foreseen, for example, in Mahler. That's the case of Mahler. That is what it is. It is. That is what Bernstein intends to say. So where is this headed? That's the first question we should ask ourselves. And the fascination produced by listening to this banal presumption, do, re, mi, fa, or CDEF, we do not suspect that it's going to go in that direction. So I can see that in the musical domain, particularly, this notion manifests itself as precisely that. I never could have imagined I mean, I never could have imagined that it would end up there, that is the journey that I would take, because that the declination that you have decided upon will explicit a different thing. That is, in these phenomena, there's always something that is ahead of our imagination. It is transcendent in this sense. So our imagination, maybe God's imagination is so big that who knows, I don't know, maybe God, there's no resonance about God, or there's no resonance in God. But there's another idea which is quite interesting. According to my perspective, so I was thinking about undisposable. I want to explain why I decided to go for this word. These are declinations that, well, this has to do with interpretational pluralism. Each interpretation is going to underscore one aspect of this thing.
So the aspect that I wanted to highlight is that, in my opinion, in this case, we are referring to a sociological pathos that also comes from or relates to this tradition. And to me, resonance means one human being that is disposed is not a human being. There's a human relationship from which, as a kid, or since being a kid, I can expect something from someone. So I believe that his diagnosis of resonance, he's trying to offer some way to make criticism of the speed in the modern society, but resonance is related to that. And actually, we need to see this reification. So the relation of domains that break something, and they break something essential, and we can be called human beings, but we cannot believe that everyone is always at our disposal. So when musicians refer to this Überführbarkeit, when interpreting Beethoven, the translation is very well, because each time is unexpected. I will play it again, and I can never expect for it to be the same. So you want to stress that moment. And to me, what I wanted to stress with this translation is that the relationship with which we relate to classics, in the sense of Gadamer, these works that keep on provoking us, is how we might stand before human beings. We needed to learn from there how to talk to people, how to work with people. Always thinking that an individual at any point can say no. So always consider this gift, which is a possibility to work with someone else. So I have this pathos because I think that from the sociological perspective in Rosa, this is what he's interested in. He wants to say, this is not the way. Creativity and all of that, well, without that point, it will be a detail that ruins everything else. But I completely agree that in the music domain, this concept is manifested as the unexpected. And when I play it again, I could have never imagined, like when we listen to an interpreter that we appreciate for several reasons. And one of them is I could never imagine that Schubert could sound like that. That was unexpected. It completely changed my idea. So in the music domain, this concept is seen or manifested in that decline. And I was with this sociological pathos. So I believe that our relationship with works of art is a discipline to relearn to have human relations in this regard. So this is my point. And this is why I am interested in this time structure. There's a quote from a lesson from Gerard Bensoussan in Strasbourg. It's gossip. It's hearsay. He says something like, in Levinas, there's this quote that says, the relationship with others is a way of time, or is a type of time. Relationship with others is a way of time. And I think that this is related to detail, because the future is no longer what we expected, is never what we expected. This is the relationship. And this is why I am interested in this, because if we as community can fixate the structure, we will need to be having like an aesthetic attitude. I mean, it's not an interior aspect. This is an ontological structure. We need to give objectivity to that. So I am interested in these detailed phrases because of this, the ontological structure of the relationship with the otherness. This is why I was interested in this possibility. Okay, we have Santiago, but before that, you mean that the experience of you as presented by Gadamer and Buber before that, and with this sense of the unexpected, when Buber says to take the other as an individual, but as a real person, puts me in this situation where I cannot know beforehand what the person will say or argue. So this unexpected feature works not only for the musical domain, but maybe for the experience with others or with the hermeneutic experience, as Gadamer explains. Yes, I totally agree. Yes, the power relation is a relation in which the entity in power thinks and calculates that others will never surprise them. Yeah, and that's where there's no escape crash. Yes, yeah, it works both ways. Yes. Santiago and then Carlos. Marcello, thank you so much. I have a lot to say, but I will say very few things. There's one thing, and maybe I didn't understand this well. The word indisposability. Disposable actually means disposable, not available in English. It's like you can dispose of it, like you can throw it away. It's not related to the availability. So that's the banal meaning. That, because I feel like I understand, but maybe there's a meaning for disposable that I don't understand in English. I think that the rest, I got it. And when you spoke about Levinas, it got me thinking, and this is what I study and what I write about and what I lecture on, which is the feeling that I had during your entire presentation, which is how resonance is what allows us to understand how passive the subjects are, meaning that the subject or the individual is susceptible to something happening to them. And there's Levinas' disciple, Claude Romano. I don't know if you've known about him. He was my professor. He is quite young, and he redefines the Das Ein not as the be there, but là où quelque chose va passer. Defining this subjectivity and to put it as the place where things are happening. And we are lucky because in Spanish we have the word acontecimiento, which is not the same as event. So my question is, within this ethic aesthetic implied by resonance, this is seen not only in those creating art, but also those watching, the audience being transformed by this artistic experience. If that can be a definition of resonance, this ethic or aesthetic. And this allows us to redefine the artist as where beauty will happen or might happen. That's what I wanted to say, but thank you. Thank you. Something that cannot be thrown away, that you cannot throw into the trash. Disposable is what you can throw into the trash. Yeah, but it can be available too. Oh, okay, okay. I said this at the beginning, English is not my mother tongue. Sorry. It's indisposable, not undisposable. Yeah, but well, the strength to me was not on that. I can do this and the other one can say no. I don't like your tone. I don't like your manners, so I'm very sorry. So that's what I wanted to stress. So I won't have the certainty that something will happen. So that was my emphasis. I think that in Rosa, that's what he wants to say. That's his goal. Yeah, he was aiming at that. Yeah, it's clear. And with Levinas, there are many things, and I don't know how the radical formulation of passivity in Levinas and the asymmetry between you and I can be compatible with the other work done by Rosa. So we have the figure of responsibility, and it's me that I have to. I was chosen for the other. So I have to respond. But I'm not sure that both things are compatible in Levinas, but that's very long to discuss. And in terms of the design, or where beauty will be, or where something happening and that's the event, well, you see, I don't know. I will improvise right now. I think it's related to the history of capitalism. It's a story of events, because many things we could have not imagined them, in the good and in the bad sense. So I think that a necessary condition, but not enough, would be for something to happen, because there could be something happening that in itself might not be compatible with resonance, because it could be something expected in the bad sense as well that goes against resonance. There's a repertoire in the past 300 years of events that could be used as an example of what I believe. So we can also be surprised by something like, for example, the figure of irony or Hegel. I could have not imagined that things were going to happen the way they did, but that itself, I mean, the irony in Vernost, like what is happening, cannot be related to resonance. It could be a situation. Like 2 days ago in Freiburg, it was about irony. So I ask, why is a situation like this nowadays? Can you think of something that is happening nowadays that portrays this irony? And someone said, yeah, for example, social media. In theory, it was supposed to join us together, but it actually produced a lot of division. Each one of us is a cocoon now, and that goes against resonance. And I don't want to only focus on the bad things of social media. There are good things about social media, but also there's this effect of social media. And this is something that happened that might have been unexpected or not. I mean, probably they did not create social media to isolate people. So it was unexpected. So did it happen? Yes. Is that related to resonance? I don't think so. So we need to see what is happening, the contents.
I think that the conditions need to be necessary, not necessarily sufficient, because if nothing happens, then there's no resonance. I mean, if everything is decided beforehand, then it won't work. So it's a falsely resonant, I would say. It's a theological question as well. I might assert that it's a necessary condition, but not as a sufficient condition. I have my misgivings with regard to that. Marcello, Carlos, we have an extra few minutes. Then in just a few minutes, the interpreters will have to withdraw, but Carlos has one additional question. I have two questions, Marcello. The first one is, could you explain, well, because I did not fully understand the transcendental significance of resonance. So what do you mean by that? And secondly, the experience of an indisposability or unavailability. If I'm not mistaken, it is as part of that the experience happens, the event of the unpredictable and the surprising, the unexpected, but which also allows us to connect with ourselves and with the other in our conversation or in musical listening. This unavailability, doesn't it require performative indications that may prepare, that may produce availability to receiving that? So the two questions are interconnected. My interest for what is transcendental has to do with the second question as well. But I will go ahead and answer the first one. My interest is that one. It has to do with the falsification of resonance. So this idea that just because something is unnecessary, it needs to happen outside of time. What happens in time, within time, is necessary. It's not predictable, at least for us who are ignorant, but if I knew all the details, I would be fit to predict everything. So predictability is a limitation that we have. It is up to us. It is our fault, so to speak. But if we were omniscient, all-knowing, we might be able to do it. We might be able to predict things. So freedom may happen just at face value, or what I may do reflectively thinking about a technological structure, but it doesn't have an objective value. The third criticism, or Kant's third criticism, states that reflective judgment does not have value. I think that the interest in this transcendental factor of resonance is not a new thing. Kant already made reference to that. There is a time, historical time, the time of history with a capital H, where the future is not determined by the past. There is a time in which the future determines the past. So that's my first interest. Secondly, if we are capable of identifying a transcendental structure of unavailability, or suspectability, not because I'm an ignorant, because nobody, not even God, might imagine that this would be it. So there we go, to free ourselves up from all potential criticism to subjectivism, to the issue of aesthetic attitude as a psychological thing. So this is a feeble point, a weak point of aesthetics. If we mean to identify something that is ontologically the way it is, then we are going to be providing a basis for any number of things. Of an ethical and an aesthetic nature, it would be good business. So we will have an objective basis. We would have an objective basis in that scenario. Now, the second point that you mentioned is the following. Yes, but let us use a little bit of a Marxist vocabulary, even though it is out of fashion. An alienated person, a person that has spent his or her entire life repeating the same thing and in a domination relationship with their bosses and so on, that person is not sensitive anymore. They have lost this contact. And I agree with that. But that means that that person has lost contact with reality. They are no longer a should be. What I'm interested in is, if in this transcendental structure, if I identify a transcendental value, it's no longer an issue of it should be this way, but rather it is because the alienated person has lost touch, not with the ideal world, Schiller's world, but rather the person has been alienated from reality. They have lost contact with reality. So right there, we can identify in alienation what we understand by the word itself. We have lost contact with the actual experience of reality. So I agree. There also is a subjective component, but a subjective component that we can pass judgment on this on ontological basis, on ontological grounds. It's not that we're talking about the ideal world here. No ideal world here. It's reality that is that way. If you are not capable of recognizing it, we will be removed from reality. And that is what interests me, and providing an objective basis to that. I hope my answer has, I hope I sort of provided an answer to your question. Yes, thank you. Okay, Marcello, thank you very much. Thank you to the interpreters as well. The interpretation was really flawless, and thank you to all the members of the team that joined us. The text is available, so you can read it and enjoy it. Once again, Marcello, thank you so much for the wealth of reflections that you shared with us. Thank you so much. My pleasure. And I suppose it's almost midnight for you.